All right. Today we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapters 21 and 22. And to bring you up to speed on where we're at right now, Saul is trying to kill David, actively trying to kill him. He's hunting him. Jonathan and David just separated after Jonathan shot the arrows, letting David know that he needed to leave. So David's on the run, and he has Saul searching for him. And that's where chapter 21 picks up. We'll start at verse 1. It reads, "Then David came to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came to meet David, trembling, and said to him, 'Why are you alone, and no one with you?' And David said to Ahimelech the priest, 'The king has charged me with a matter, and said to me, Let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you, and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place.'" So David's lying to Ahimelech, who's the priest right now. Ahimelech is a descendant. He's actually the great-grandson of Eli, who we read about at the beginning of 1 Samuel, whose household is going to be judged. It already has been partially judged. It will be partially judged one more time, and then that prophecy will be completely fulfilled later on in David's time, or in Solomon's time, actually, David's son. Verse 3, "Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here." And the priest answered David, "I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread." This is what we might have heard it called the showbread. "If the young men have kept themselves from women." And David answered the priest, "Truly women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy even when it is an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away. Now, if you can see where we're at on the map here, we have Palestine or Philistia, Israel here. And if we zoom in a little bit, we have Ramah, where Samuel was from. We have Gibeah, where Saul was from. Jerusalem down here. Bethlehem, where David was from. And we have Nob over here to the northeast of Jerusalem. Some scholars believe that this was actually on the Mount of Olives in that area. So that's where David has run to, and that's where he meets Ahimelech the priest. That's where he gets the bread. Verse 7, "Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen." Whenever scripture starts off talking about a certain man, usually it's not a good thing. And that is going to be the case here. However, it's not an accident that Doeg the Edomite is there and overhears this conversation. I believe that there's a reason why an Edomite was there to overhear it and not one of the Hebrews. And we'll get into that here shortly. Verse 8, "Then David said to Ahimelech, Then have you not here a spear or a sword at hand? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." So David still, it tends to happen. If you tell a lie, you're going to have to tell more lies to try to keep up with that one. And that's what David's doing right now. The king's business is killing David, is finding him and killing him. So he's made up this story. Verse 9, "And the priest," this is Ahimelech, "said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, who you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is none but that here." And David said, "There is none like that. Give it to me." So the fact that the ephod is there and Goliath's sword, this more or less reinforces the idea that when Shiloh was, it seems like, destroyed, when the Philistines attacked it, when the Ark of the Covenant was captured earlier, it's believed that Shiloh was destroyed then. So when it was destroyed, it seems like the priesthood was moved over to Nob, this city that we're reading about right now. We'll find that there's many or all of the priests there. Now, we know that Samuel was in a different compound, Naoith. It's hard for me to say. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. But the school of the prophets was down there. This is a separate thing. This is where the priests are. The ephod's there. Goliath's sword is there. David takes it back. Verse 10, and David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Now, if that seems strange, we might remember, whose sword did he just take? It was Goliath's sword. That he did what with? That he killed Goliath with. So David takes the sword of the champion from Gath and takes it back to Gath. Right? Goliath was from Gath, and that's where David just took off to hide with Goliath's sword. Verse 11, and the servants of Achish said to him, is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. But I tell you what, if we remember how upset Saul got when that did happen, when David and came into the city and they were singing these songs, and it made Saul so upset, right? Because his pride was hurt. His ego was hurt. He wants to be the most important person. So he can't have even his armor bearer, his right-hand guy, he can't have him getting credit for things. You know, the credit was all for Saul. He can't share that. His ego won't let him. Now, if he knew that even in Philistine towns, they knew this song and they knew what was going on, and they suspected David to be king of the land, Saul would have really been twisted up about that one. But we move on. Verse 12, and David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. Now, let's look on our map where we're at while we're here. So he went from Nob all the way over here, went all the way over here to Gath, the Philistine city. We'll see some of the other Philistine cities over here as well. Ekron. So he was much afraid of the king of Gath. Verse 13, so he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands, and made marks on the doors of the gate, and let his spit run down his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, behold, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen, that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? So there's a couple interesting things there. When we see, I was overlooking it. At the end of verse 14, it says, why then have you brought him to me? It seems like maybe David didn't come on his own accord to the king, and that he was brought there. And for a little bit of a clue on that, we can look at Psalm 56, which David wrote about this exact situation. And the title of it starts off, a miktam of David when the Philistines seized him in Gath. So it does seem like David was, I don't know if arrested is the right word, maybe it is, but he was seized and then taken to the king. They brought him to the king, right? And then if we go back, it says, why did you bring him here to act like a madman? I got plenty of madmen, right? So that's how David's going to get away, is by acting like a madman. And now if we look at Psalm 34, we'll see he wrote this one. It says 34 is a Psalm of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech. Now, if we remember, Abimelech is a title. So this is King Achish, whose title was Abimelech. So that when he drove him out and he went away. So this is when he acted insane so that Abimelech or Achish would drive him away. So we see that has worked for David to get out, that he wrote some psalms, some great psalms about trusting in God to deliver him from these situations, and he did. And then as we move to chapter 22, verse 1 starts off, David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So if we come back on our map, we'll see he went to Gath from Nob, and now he's going to go over here to the cave at Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. Now, again, where was he from? He's from Bethlehem. So we assume that's where the rest of his family was. So they went down also over to Adullam, to where David was. That might indicate to us that Saul may not have been only hunting David. He might have been looking for his whole family. and David wants to keep them safe. So his whole family escapes, and they come to meet him at the cave of Adullam. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men. Now, this is a nice shadow here. This is a nice shadow of Christ, because you see who went to David besides his family, his father's house. Who else went? It was everyone who was in distress. Jesus calls those that are in distress, doesn't he? Everyone who was in debt. A lot of us are in debt. It might be financially. It might be spiritually. We might be spiritually in debt. And everyone who was bitter in soul. Well, that should just about cover most of the people that I've ever met, really, between all those things. Basically, these are the outcasts of society that are going to meet David. Now, when Jesus came, he treated the outcasts of society in such a way that he got a nickname, friend of sinners. Okay, that doesn't mean that he was friend to the sin. He was a friend of the sinner, right? These people that were thrown away by society, and they can humbly accept the situation that sin has put us in, and we can come to Christ. And these people here, they're the outcasts of society, and they have nowhere to run. But now there's David. Now there's the anointed king hiding in a cave, and they want to rally to him. Right? Who else is there? It's the same thing that was it Peter that said to Jesus, where can we go? You have the words to eternal life. Right? These people followed David. They believed that he could lead them. They correctly believed that. Verse 3, and David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother stay with you till I know what God will do for me. So if we go back to our map, we have the cave at Adullam, and this trip is going to be long, right? He's going to escape from there all the way over here to Moab. Why would David go all the way to Moab, foreign land? Why would he go all the way there? If we remember back when we were looking at Ruth, Ruth was a Moabite. Ruth's family was from Moab. Boaz and Ruth are the great-grandparents of David. So he does, although they may be a little bit distant, he does have family or relatives, relation in Moab, and he can trust those guys. Now, on the other hand, we learned in 1 Samuel, maybe chapter 14 or so, that Saul was actually enemies with Moab. So it seems like that they would not assist Saul in finding David or David's family because they were enemies. Whereas David, even though Saul was his king and they were enemies, David was still kind of family, right? And they treated each other well. So verse 4, he, David, left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, do not remain in the stronghold, depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. If we go back to the map, we can see back from Moab here, the forest is just a little bit southeast of the cave of Adullam. So that's where he's hiding out now. Also notice that when the prophet told him, do not remain, go, David did not remain. He went. Verse 6, now Saul heard that David was discovered and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Okay, so we have David at the forest here, and then we have Saul underneath the tamarisk tree in Gibeah to the north there a little bit. We'll also notice, as usual, Saul has his spear in his hand. We keep in mind that the spear was his symbol, more or less, of his kingship. It was the scepter of the time that represented the kingship. So even though he had a tendency to throw that spear at David, which is ironic, it seems like in this situation he had that spear maybe since we know what he's about to do here. He's about to try to rally the troops. It seems like he had that spear as a sign that he was the authority, not David. He was the authority. I'm the king. I have the scepter, right? Is the impression I get about it. So verse 7, and Saul said to his servants who stood about him, hear now, people of Benjamin. So remember, Saul was from Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. He was a Benjamite. And we know that David was from the tribe of Judah. He was from Bethlehem, but he was from the tribe of Judah. And that, according to the promise, is where the king would come from. So even though Saul is a legitimate king, he's not the one that the Lord wanted. That's David. So he gave the people the king they wanted. That was Saul. It worked out horribly. He replaces him with the king after his own heart, David. So he's talking to the people of Benjamin. He's trying to rally them. He says, will the son of Jesse, this is David. If we haven't been keeping up, Saul doesn't like to use David's name. He hates him. And we'll see that periodically as he talks about, or to other people that he hates, he won't use their name. He'll use their lineage. So, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Well, he might not. We have no indication that Saul did those things either. Basically, he's talking to what's left of the people that support him, which is maybe mostly dwindled down to the tribe of Benjamin. He's trying to get more people to enlist in his service, it seems. So he says that all of you have conspired against me. So he's accusing the whole tribe of conspiring against him. Now what? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. Okay, that's true. Jonathan and David did make a covenant. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day. So that is either a lie, or since we know that Saul is in the process of going mad, it seems, maybe he truly feels that Jonathan and David have come up with some sort of ambush to take out Saul, because that's what he's accusing them of. But we have no indication to that. It seems like he's just made this up. Verse 9, then answered Doeg the Edomite. Now, we remember when David went and saw Ahimelech at Nob, there was an Edomite there. It was Doeg. He overheard everything. So then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. Now, why would Doeg bring this up just now? Well, Saul is accusing everybody, apparently in Israel, of being against him, of conspiring against him. So it seems that old Doeg, the Edomite, is trying to build up some favor with the king. So he says, I saw something you might be interested in. Let me tell you about it. Verse 11. Then the king, this is Saul, sent to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. So it doesn't at least suggest that they were compelled or forced. It just, they were compelled. The king summoned them, but it seems like came willingly. Verse 12, and Saul said, hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, here I am, my lord. And Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me? Let me not skip past that. It's another time that it happens here. Verse 12, and Saul said, hear now, son of Ahitub. So this is Ahimelech he's talking to, but he doesn't want to use his name. He uses his lineage instead. And Ahimelech answered, here I am, my lord. And Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me, to lie in wait as at this day? Then Ahimelech answered the king, "And who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard, and honored in your house?" Ahimelech saying, Who would you trust more than him? Of course I do these things for him. He's this and this and this for you. Who would you trust more than him? Of course I did this. Verse 15, is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little. So Ahimelech's telling the truth. What's going on here, it seems. But Saul is convinced that everybody, apparently including the priesthood, is against him. Verse 16, and the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." Let's stop right there. This is another partial fulfillment of a prophecy that we've seen partially fulfilled a couple other times. And we're going to look back at that real quick. It's in this same book. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 2. It starts at verse 27. Eli was the priest at the time when Samuel was born, and Eli's sons also worked there, and they treated the offerings and sacrifices terribly. They treated the people bad. They were not good people, and it says specifically they did not know the Lord, but they were serving there. Let that catch your attention too. So let's pick up and read chapter 2, verse 27 here real quick and see what the prophecy was against Eli. It says, "And there came a man of God to Eli and said to him, Thus says the Lord, did I indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt, subject to the house of Pharaoh? Did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me?" He's talking about Levi, right? The priesthood is from the tribe of Levi, the Levitical priesthood. That's these people. That's what the Lord's talking about. "I gave to the house of your father all my offerings by fire from the people of Israel." Verse 29, "Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel? Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that your house and the house of your father should go in and out before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed." And here's the part. "Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. Then in distress you will look with envious eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed on Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep his eyes out, to grieve his heart, and all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men." So, and it was directly after this prophecy that the ark was taken. Eli heard about it and fell off his chair and broke his neck. Both of his sons, it says, all of your descendants will die by the sword of men. Both of his sons were killed in battle that day. Now, one of their wives had a child born that day, Ichabod, whose name incidentally means the glory has departed, because the ark was taken. So that, the glory of the Lord was gone in their minds. And Ichabod's mom also died in childbirth that same day. So all this happens. The house is pretty well wiped out, but Ichabod remained. And then we see that Ichabod did end up having a family, and it moves down to Ahitub and Ahimelech. But this prophecy still open, right? We've seen the partial fulfillments, Eli, his sons, when they die, but it's not fulfilled yet. All the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men. Well, let's move back to chapter 22. When he says, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." So God has determined that this is the judgment on the house of Eli, on his, and that means his lineage, his descendants. These things are going to happen as judgment. Now, God also determined that Christ would be crucified. Does that excuse what Pilate did? It does not. Does it excuse what the crowd did? It does not. The only thing that excuses that is the blood that came from it, the faith in Jesus for the crucifixion, the death, the resurrection, the forgiveness of sins that we have through him. That's the only thing that excuses it, that forgives it. But just because God has determined the fate of somebody or something, that does not excuse whoever does that thing, if it's sinful. And that was, and this is. And the king said to the guard who stood about him, so this is the king's guard, right? The secret service of the day. Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand is also with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. So a couple things there. Saul's gone completely mad. He has just told his bodyguards, the other Hebrews, the other Israelites that are there, to kill the entire priesthood, because he thinks that they're with David, who he knows at this point is the anointed king to come. He is the neighbor that's better than Saul that was prophesied. And Saul is trying to stop God's plan, in effect, setting himself up as a type of antichrist. He's going against God's plan intentionally because he wants to hold on to that kingship. He wants to hold on to that ego trip. And he commands these Israelites to kill all these priests. And good for them. They said, no, we're not doing that. And there's a lesson from that, because we are told to obey our government and our leaders and those that are put in power over us, because we know who put them in power, right? We get this president this time, half the country hates him, the other half is okay with him. Fine. 4 years later, we might switch it up, and then the other half hates this guy and the other half loves this one. And fine and dandy, we still have to obey the government right up until it crosses the line of what's acceptable to the Lord. And we don't get to make up our own, no, I'm not going to do this. I don't think. Does Scripture say it or not? Okay, now if the government starts telling us to go against Scripture, right there, we know that's our line. We can't obey the government anymore. Is it better for us to obey God or man? That's in the New Testament. And it goes unanswered because it doesn't need answered. It's obvious, right? So these people, the government, Saul, put them in a position where they had to pick. Do we want to listen to the government, Saul, and kill these priests? Or are we going to listen to God and say, no, that ain't me, man? So they did the right thing. They said no, but there's still a judgment against the house of Eli. Verse 18. Then the king said to Doeg, you turn and strike the priests. And Doeg the Edomite, why do they keep pointing out he's an Edomite? Because he's not under the covenant like the Israelites are. He's not one of the covenant people. He doesn't respect the priesthood of Yahweh. He might not even know who he is. His only, it seems like he's pretty well aligned with Saul, where his only thing is he wants to climb the ladder also. He wants to ride Saul's coattails and get his ego also served. So he has no problem doing it. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests. And he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. 85 priests Doeg kills. Now, again, there was a prophecy against the house of Eli. This was going to happen. That does not excuse Doeg in what he did. It's just because it's going to happen does not excuse the sin from the person who actually does it. So, but he's not done. Doeg, he's not done. Verse 19, after he kills 85 priests, verse 19, and Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword, both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, sheep, he put to the sword. So Saul has David not only kill all the priests, to kill all their families, to kill everybody in the whole village, including all the animals. So one thing we might remember is, why did Saul get the kingdom taken away from him to begin with? Saul was in battle with the Amalekites, and the Lord told him, if we haven't studied Hurim, we can go back and look at that. But basically, that's called being under the ban or under the judgment. And when God does that, that means no survivors. You're eliminating a vulgar culture at that point. Nothing remains, including animals. This is what Saul was supposed to do to the Amalekites, and he didn't. So that's why Samuel had to kill King Agag. And that's when the prophecy came that the kingdom was being torn away from Saul because he kept disobeying the commandments of God. And now, one step further, he's doing the extermination that was to be done to the Amalekites. He's doing that to Israelites, to a priest city. Saul's completely off the rails at this point. But he didn't get everybody. We see in verse 20, but one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. So David takes responsibility. He knows his lie to Ahimelech makes him at least partly responsible for what just happened, if not completely responsible, since if he wouldn't have shown up there in the first place, it wouldn't have happened. But again, this is ordained. The judgment was already handed down. So this did happen. David takes his part of responsibility. Verse 23, stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me, you shall be in safekeeping. Right? This is another shadow. This is a good shepherd shadowing the good shepherd. If they're out to kill you, stay with me. With me, you'll be safe. Right? That's what Jesus tells us. Stay with me. With me, you'll be safe. He doesn't promise that we'll be safe physically. He doesn't promise that our flesh will be safe on this earth, in this life, but he does promise our eternal safety in the peace. This little drop in the bucket that we're spending on this rock is not the time to worry about being safe or anything like that. And we all want to be safe, but these are secondary things. The primary thing is the kingdom and that eternal safety. And that's what matters most. Knowing Jesus, and with him, we'll be in safekeeping forever.